The knock at the door. It was a cold night. The wind outside was strong and snow kept falling. Daniel sat alone inside his small house. He lived far from the main human colony. He liked the quiet and didn't get many visitors. But that night, everything changed. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was soft, almost like someone was too weak to knock harder. Daniel stood still. No one ever came here, especially not in the middle of a storm. The knock came again, slower, softer. He slowly walked to the door and opened it. Outside stood a young alien woman. She looked thin, shaking, and her clothes were torn and wet. Behind her were two small children holding her legs tightly. They looked scared and freezing. The woman looked up at Daniel with tired eyes and said in a low voice, "Please, human, take us in. I'll be a good wife. My children won't be a burden." Daniel didn't speak for a few seconds. He was shocked. He had never seen this woman before. Her skin was pale blue, and she had soft markings on her cheeks, a sign of her species. Her children looked the same. Daniel noticed they had no coats or shoes, and one child was coughing badly. "Please," she said again. "We have no place to go. If we stay outside tonight, we will die." Daniel looked at the woman's eyes. There was fear, but also something else. Strength. She wasn't begging like a beggar. She was offering something, a life, a deal, maybe even hope. He opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. The woman and her children stepped inside. They stood near the fire, warming their hands. The children didn't speak. They only looked around as if they had never been inside a safe place before. Daniel brought them towels and warm water. The woman thanked him softly. Her voice was careful, like she didn't know if kindness would last. Daniel gave them food. The children ate quickly, too quickly. They must have been starving. After a while, the woman finally spoke again. "My name is Laura. These are my children, Kyle and Mira." Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel." She looked down, then said, "I meant what I said. I can clean, cook, and help you. I can be a good wife. I just need a safe place for them." Daniel didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to this. He had seen many things in this galaxy, wars, politics, and betrayal. But this was different. This was simple and real. A mother trying to protect her children. "Why come to me?" he finally asked. Laura looked at him with sad eyes. "I heard, humans are kind, that you don't leave the weak to die. My people, they are not like that." Daniel frowned. "They left you?" "They said I was cursed," she said, "because my mate died in an accident. They believe widows bring bad luck. They told me to leave the settlement and take my children with me." Daniel was quiet. He had read about her species. They were strict, followed strange traditions, and didn't forgive easily. But still, to throw out a mother and her children into the snow, it felt cruel even by alien standards. "They gave me one blanket and said to leave by nightfall," Laura continued. "I walked for 2 days. I followed the human beacon. I didn't think I would reach anyone." Daniel looked at the two children. Kyle was sleeping now, curled near the fire. Mira looked half asleep but held her mother's hand tightly. They looked like they had been through a lot. Laura sat with her hands folded. She didn't ask for more, she just waited. She had done what she could. Now she waited for his choice. Daniel finally spoke. "You can stay, but you don't need to be my wife to earn that." Laura looked surprised. "But I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said. "No one who tries to protect their children is a burden." Laura's eyes filled with water. She didn't cry, but Daniel saw how close she was to breaking. She bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Daniel gave them his extra blankets and slept in the chair near the door. He couldn't sleep much. Something in his chest felt heavy. Not fear, but the weight of a new life beginning. He didn't know who this woman truly was or what her past held. But he knew one thing. No one should be alone in the cold with children hoping for mercy. And tomorrow, Tomorrow he would find out what else she might be hiding. A past. She hides. Daniel woke early. The storm outside had stopped, but the cold still filled the air. He checked on Laura and the children. They were still asleep near the fire, wrapped in blankets. For the first time since they arrived, their faces looked peaceful. But Daniel's mind was not at rest. Something about Laura's words still echoed in his thoughts. She had come alone, in the dark, with 2 children, and made a strange offer, to be a wife to a man she didn't know. And though she said she had been thrown out for being a widow, Daniel felt there was more to her story. People don't walk for days in a storm unless they are running from something worse. When Laura finally woke, she thanked him again. She helped prepare a simple breakfast and made sure her children ate before her. She moved like someone used to doing everything alone. Her hands were careful, her voice quiet, and her eyes kept watching everything, like she was always waiting for something bad to happen. After the meal, Daniel asked her, "Did you always live with your people on this planet?" Laura nodded slowly. "Yes. My people came here many cycles ago. We built a settlement deep in the mountain zone. Life was hard, but it was home." He noticed the way she avoided looking directly at him when she spoke. He asked again gently, "Were you happy there?" This time she paused longer. "I was trying to be." Daniel didn't push her, but her words left a space that needed to be filled. He went outside to gather firewood, and when he returned, he found Mira sitting silently by the window, staring at the sky. Laura was gently brushing Kale's hair. It looked like she was trying to make them look proper, even in such a place. Daniel sat down and looked at her again. "You said your mate died in an accident. What kind of accident?" Laura stiffened. "A mining collapse. He was inside when the ground fell. They didn't bring his body back." "I'm sorry," Daniel said. She nodded, but said nothing more. Her silence said more than her words. Later that day, while the children napped, Daniel saw Laura washing their clothes with careful hands. As she lifted her sleeve, Daniel noticed deep bruises on her arms. Not old ones, fresh ones. He stepped closer. "Laura, those marks on your arm, who did that to you?" She froze. For a long moment there was no answer. Then she said, very softly, "Before they made me leave, I was punished." "Punished? For what?" "For speaking out," she replied. "I asked for help. I told them my children were hungry. I asked the elders for extra food. They said I had become proud, that I was no longer respectful. They called it a warning." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not a warning, that's cruelty." Laura looked away. "In my culture, a widow has no voice. We are taught that once a male dies, the female must carry shame. If she speaks, if she asks, it is seen as dishonor." Daniel felt his chest grow tight with anger. He had heard of alien traditions before. Some were strange, some were strict. But this was worse than he had expected. A culture that let women starve and children suffer just because a man was no longer alive. "You don't have to live by those rules anymore," he said. "Not here." Laura gave a faint smile. "I know, but it's not easy to forget them." Daniel nodded. He understood. Even when a person escapes a prison, the chains sometimes stay in the mind. That night, Laura helped clean the small house. She moved with care, trying not to break anything or do anything wrong. It wasn't just kindness, it was fear. Fear of being sent away again. Fear of not being enough. As Daniel watched her put the children to bed, he saw the truth more clearly. She wasn't here only because she was cold or hungry. She was here because her past had tried to destroy her spirit, and she was still fighting to keep it alive. He stood by the door watching the snow outside. Behind him, Laura whispered, "I didn't mean to lie. I just didn't want to scare you away." Daniel turned to her. "You didn't lie. You survived. That's enough for now." Laura nodded, but her eyes were still heavy with unspoken pain. Daniel didn't press her further, but inside, he knew. This story was just beginning, and whatever she had left behind, it might still be coming. Children without a childhood. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of quiet footsteps. It wasn't Laura, it was the children. Kale and Mira were already awake, sitting in the corner watching him. They didn't make a sound. No giggles, no questions. Just silent eyes that looked far older than their years. Daniel offered them warm bread. They took it carefully, like it might be taken away. Mira didn't eat until Kale had finished his piece. It was a small thing, but Daniel noticed it. These children had learned to survive, not to live. Later, Laura joined them. She thanked Daniel again for the shelter. But even as she smiled, Daniel could see the sadness in her face. She had raised them alone, without help, without comfort, just survival. Day by day, Daniel tried to bring some joy into the room. He pulled out a small music cube, something from Earth. He placed it on the table. Soft notes filled the air, gentle, playful tunes. But the children froze. Kyle covered his ears. Mira moved behind her mother, trembling. Laura quickly calmed them. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's just music." Daniel turned off the cube. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare them." Laura nodded slowly. "They're not used to sound like that. Where we lived, silence meant safety. Noise brought attention and sometimes punishment." Daniel felt his heart grow heavier. These children hadn't played. They hadn't laughed. They hadn't felt safe enough to even enjoy something as simple as a song. He couldn't imagine a childhood like that. Later that day, Daniel brought out old boxes filled with tools, spare wires, and some broken gadgets. He placed them on the floor and sat down. He didn't say much, just started fixing a broken scanner. Kyle slowly walked over and sat across from him, quiet, watching. Daniel handed him a small screwdriver and pointed to the open panel. "You want to try?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Mira joined a few minutes later, sitting close to her brother. Daniel gave her a small flashlight. She smiled just a little. For the first time, Daniel saw something change in them. Their shoulders relaxed. Their eyes sparkled just a bit. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. That night, as Daniel repaired an old heater unit, Laura spoke quietly beside him. "They've never played with toys before. Our people don't allow that. Children must learn to obey, not waste time." Daniel frowned. "They're just kids." Laura's voice was full of regret. "I tried to give them small moments of happiness, but every time someone told me I was raising them wrong. I was warned that if I made them soft, they would be punished when older." He didn't respond right away. What could he say to that? In his world, children were protected, loved, taught with patience. In hers, they were trained like soldiers. "These children," Daniel said after a while, "they don't need to be raised like that anymore. They're safe here." Laura nodded, but there was fear in her eyes. "I want to believe that, but I keep waiting for someone to knock on the door and take them away," Daniel promised her. "No one's taking them. Not while I'm here." Before bed, Mira walked up to him with something in her hand. It was a small metal part he'd left behind. She had cleaned it and polished it with a cloth. She held it out like a gift. Daniel took it with a smile. "Thank you." She nodded once, then ran back to her mother. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. These children didn't need toys. They needed to be treated like they mattered, and Daniel decided that's exactly what he was going to do. Whispers in the dark. The night was too quiet. Even the wind had stopped, as if the world was holding its breath. Daniel couldn't sleep. Something felt off. He stood by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the snowy trees. The stars were clear, the sky calm, but his heart wasn't. He thought about Laura and her children, now sleeping peacefully under warm blankets. Just days ago, they were alone in the cold, waiting to die. Now they were safe. But safety could be fragile, especially when shadows from the past refused to stay buried. Then he heard it. A sound. Barely there. Like soft footsteps in the snow. Daniel's body tensed. He reached for his old rifle, quietly unlocking it. Years of living on the edge had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming. He stepped outside, slowly, carefully. The snow crunched under his boots. He scanned the area. Nothing. Just darkness. Then from the corner of his eye, a flash of movement. Something or someone disappeared behind a tree. Daniel raised his voice. "Who's out there?" Silence. But someone was there. Watching. When Mew. He returned inside. Laura was awake. She looked pale, as if she already knew. "They've found us, haven't they?" she whispered. Daniel stared at her. "Who?" She looked at her children, still asleep, then back at him. "The clan. My former settlement. They must have followed our trail." Daniel stepped closer. "Why? You said they cast you out." Laura lowered her eyes. "They did. But they didn't want the children to survive. Especially Kale." "Why, Kale?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. She hesitated, then said, "He has something rare. A genetic code. Something in his blood. They believe it can be sold to the highest bidder. For science, for breeding programs, for military use. They didn't care about him as a child, only as a resource." Daniel felt a cold anger rise in him. "So they threw you out hoping you'd die, but now that they realize he's worth something, they want him back?" She nodded. "They will try to take him, even if it means killing me." Daniel looked at her in silence. He had invited a quiet widow and her children into his home, but now he realized he had also invited a war. "They won't touch this house," he said finally. "Not while I'm standing." Laura looked at him with wide eyes. She didn't expect anyone to stand for her, not after the way her people treated her. But Daniel wasn't like them. The next day, Daniel checked the perimeter. He reinforced the locks, cleaned the weapons, and quietly moved supplies closer to the main room. Laura watched him but didn't question anything. She just made sure the children stayed inside and didn't look out the windows. At night, they kept the lights low. Mira sensed something was wrong. She clung to her mother more than usual. Kale sat quietly, listening to every sound. Daniel sat with them and told them stories from Earth. Happy ones, about oceans and forests and cities filled with lights. The children listened with wide eyes. They had never seen any of those things, but just hearing about them gave them something they had never had before. A dream. That night, Laura whispered to Daniel, "I don't know why you're helping us." Daniel looked at her. "Because no one else did. And because it's the right thing to do." She nodded, her voice low. "You're not like others, not even your own kind." Daniel gave a small smile. "Maybe that's why I live out here." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't just kindness. He had begun to care, not just for the children but for Laura too. Her strength, her quiet fight, her deep love for her kids. It stirred something in him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the wind picked up again. Somewhere in the trees, someone was still watching. The darkness hadn't left. It was only waiting. The promise of protection. The next morning, the snow was untouched, but Daniel could feel the danger growing closer. The silence was too perfect. Every hour felt like the calm before a storm. He didn't tell Laura, but he had spotted fresh footprints near the edge of the woods. They were not his, and they were too small and light to belong to an animal. Someone was scouting them, watching, waiting. Inside, he did his best to act normal. He helped Laura cook. He smiled at the children. He even played a simple word game with Mira to teach her Earth language. But his mind stayed alert, one hand always near the old weapon at his side. Laura noticed. She was quiet, moving carefully, always keeping the children close. That evening, Daniel finally spoke to her. "If they come for you, I need to know. Will you fight or run?" She looked down. "I've run enough, Daniel. If they take Cale, they will turn him into a thing, not a boy. I can't let that happen." Daniel nodded. "Then we'll stand." Together, Laura placed a hand on the table. It was shaking. "I meant it, what I said the night we arrived. I can be a good wife. I can help you. I can make a home here." Daniel looked at her. She wasn't offering out of fear anymore. This time it felt like something else. Trust. He replied gently, "You already helped me. You didn't need to promise anything." "But I want to," she said. "I want my children to grow up knowing warmth, safety, and love. Things I didn't know could exist." Daniel didn't answer right away, but he reached across the table and took her hand. "Then stay. Not because you owe me, but because this is your home now." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. The first real smile he had seen from her. That night, Daniel taught Cale how to lock the doors properly. He showed Mira where the emergency light was. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was trying to prepare them. Laura helped, turning the lessons into a quiet game. The children didn't understand everything, but they followed closely. Daniel also moved his backup comms device to the living room, just in case. He set a silent alarm to catch any movement outside the fence. When the children were asleep, Laura sat beside the fire and whispered, "When I was little, I used to dream of someone like you, but I never thought anyone like you was real." Daniel looked at her. "I used to dream of someone like you too. Strong, brave, honest." She laughed softly. "Brave? I was shaking when I knocked on your door." "And still, you knocked," he said. "That's real courage." The fire crackled between them. There were no more walls now, no more pretending. Two souls, both broken in their own way, had finally found each other in the middle of nowhere. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside the house, there was peace. Until the alarm flashed. Daniel stood up fast, heart pounding. Laura froze, eyes wide. "Is it them?" He checked the monitor. Several figures, moving fast, coming straight toward the house. "It's time," Daniel said. Laura didn't run. She looked at her children, kissed their foreheads, then grabbed a heavy stick. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, didn't see a refugee or a stranger. He saw a partner. He saw family. The storm arrives. The night cracked open like thunder. Footsteps pounded in the snow. Shadows moved quickly across the yard, silent but deadly. Daniel gripped his rifle, his heart steady now. The time for waiting was over. The enemy wasn't a storm anymore. It was real, and it was here. Laura stood beside him with a blunt iron tool in her hands, eyes fixed on the door. No fear, no hesitation. She had already lost everything once. She would not lose her children again. The first knock wasn't gentle, it was hard, demanding. Then a voice shouted in a language Daniel couldn't fully understand, but Laura could. "They want Cale," she whispered, her voice shaking but strong. "They say he belongs to the clan, that we stole him." Daniel stepped forward. "You, tell them this house doesn't belong to their laws." Laura nodded and opened the window just enough to speak. Her voice was loud and clear. "We are not your property. My son is not for sale. Leave, or face human fire." There was silence for a moment, then laughter, cold, cruel, and full of confidence. Then came the crash. The back window shattered. One of them tried to climb in. Daniel fired a warning shot. The intruder dropped back with a scream. But more followed. Kyle and Mira were awake now, holding each other. Laura ran to them, shielding them with her body. Daniel stood between the door and his new family. The attackers didn't expect resistance. They thought it would be easy, a frightened widow and a lonely man. But what they found was something stronger than fear. family. Daniel fired again, this time hitting one. The others backed off, but didn't run. They began to circle the house. Laura looked up. There's a tunnel under the floor. I used it once when I escaped. It leads to the ridge. Daniel shook his head. If you go, they'll follow you. If you stay, we fight together. Laura placed a hand on his chest. Then I stay. The house trembled as another hit came from the side, but Daniel had reinforced the walls. It held. Suddenly, a smoke bomb rolled through a broken window. Laura covered the children with blankets, coughing. Daniel grabbed it and tossed it back outside before it could fill the room. They came ready. Daniel growled. This isn't about reclaiming family. This is a raid. Laura's face darkened. They never saw us as people. We were property. Kyle is valuable. Mira will be sold next. I was just the carrier. Daniel felt the fury rise in his blood. Had faced enemies before, but never one so heartless. He shouted into the cold air outside, You come here again, and I'll bury you in this snow. Then, silence again. This time, when they tried to come back, they were smarter. One climbed the roof, but Daniel saw the shadow and hit the panel that activated the emergency flare. Light exploded into the night, blinding. The attacker fell, crying out. The rest ran into the dark. Finally, it was over. Daniel lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking, his back wet with sweat. Inside, Laura was holding both children close. Mira was crying quietly. Kyle just stared, frozen. Daniel knelt beside them. It's over. You're safe. Laura looked at him with eyes full of something new. Not just relief, but something deeper. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. I never had anyone fight for me before, she whispered. Daniel placed a hand on her back. You don't have to fight alone anymore. They stayed like that for a long time, in the middle of broken windows, fallen glass, and a house that had become a fortress, not just against enemies, but against everything life had done to them. The storm outside had passed, but inside something new had begun. A real family morning light poured in through the broken windows, soft and golden, touching the floor where chaos still lingered. Burned wood, shattered glass, torn curtains, scars from the night before. But inside the house there was peace. Daniel sat quietly at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. Across from him, Laura was gently brushing Mira's hair, humming a soft tune. Kale was fixing a broken part from the heater, more focused than ever. No one spoke of the attack. They didn't need to. What mattered was that they had survived, together. It wasn't just survival anymore. Something had changed. Later that day, Daniel began repairing the damage. Laura worked beside him without being asked. She sealed cracks in the walls, swept the glass, and washed bloodstains from the floor without fear. She didn't act like a guest. She acted like this was her home. Because now, it was. Kale followed Daniel outside to help repair the fence. The boy asked questions, simple, curious questions, about tools, wires, and how to make things stronger. Daniel answered patiently. He realized this was the first time Kale had ever been allowed to just be a child. Inside, Mira played with a piece of old cloth and some buttons. She made little dolls and gave them names. One of them she called Papa. That evening, as the sun set behind the snowy trees, Laura brought in a small wooden carving. She had found it buried in the supply room. She placed it on the table and looked at Daniel. It's a symbol from my people, she said. It means home. Daniel looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. You're not planning to leave anymore, are you? He asked. Laura shook her head slowly. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. The children were sitting by the fire, their heads resting on each other's shoulders. Mira looked up sleepily and said, Mama, is it okay if I call him Papa now? Laura's lips trembled, but she nodded. Yes, Mira. You can. Daniel felt something in his chest break open, quiet, warm, and deep. He walked over and picked Mira up gently. She didn't flinch. She laid her head on his shoulder as if she had always belonged there. That night, Laura sat beside him, watching the flames dance. Her voice was calm, full of gratitude. I thought I had nothing left. I thought all I could offer was work, or silence. But you gave me more than shelter. You gave me a future. Daniel looked at her, then at the children, now asleep in a real bed for the first time without fear. He placed a hand over hers and said, You gave me something too. You reminded me what it means to care, to protect, to belong. She smiled, leaning her head gently on his shoulder. Then we belong to each other now. Outside, the world remained cold and wild. But inside the small home, a strange and beautiful warmth had taken root, from strangers in the snow, to protectors in the dark, to a real family. And that was how a human, an alien widow, and two quiet children turned survival into something far more powerful. Love. The end.